Well, thank you for the invitation. I didn't know I was the one opening, so thank you for allowing me to kick the day. And certainly, I don't think there's ever been a better time to talk about competition. There's a lot of things going on, not only in Canada, but I would say around the world, and certainly you are the thought leaders about competition in Canada, and certainly where we can go as a country as a mature economy. So great to have you all, and certainly looking forward to engage. I mean, many of you have shaped competition policies in this country for, I would say, decades, and therefore this is kind of the new journey we're going to embark together. I want to say thank you to Commissioner Boswell for his leadership and passion about competition in this country. You embodied the fight for more competition in this country, and I think each and every one of us is grateful here for your work, and thank you for your team for creating a space and an event like that where we can engage with each other as to the road ahead. So, laissez-moi commencer par vous dire qu'évidemment, vous le savez tous, vous l'avez vu, les Canadiens traversent actuellement une période difficile et s'attendent, je vous dirais, à beaucoup plus de la part du gouvernement, je vais dire tous ceux qui sont impliqués dans l'écosystème pour vraiment faire avancer, pour avoir plus de compétition au pays. Vous l'avez vu, beaucoup de Canadiens sont aux prises avec, évidemment, le coût de la vie, mais en particulier le prix des aliments. Won't come as a surprise to you that if you look at what's top of mind for Canadians these days, it's clearly cost of living, and groceries a big part of that. You'll talk about housing and certainly building a better future. Alors, on a entendu clairement leurs préoccupations et on travaille, je vous dirais, de jour après jour pour trouver des solutions. Et comme je vous disais plus tôt, j'en aurai plus à dire aujourd'hui lors d'une conférence de presse. Families are facing raising prices at the grocery store, and I would say you've seen it all faster than the overall rate of inflation. And that's what, when we say we need to help to stabilize price in this country, you have seen that. And certainly, we've been engaging, and I can speak a bit more of that, with the 5 largest grocers in this country to really be part of that and be part of the solution that Canadians expect. Household goods and services are getting more expensive across the country. And if you look at the news articles, you don't need to go very far or look on social media, or if you have conversation at the kitchen table in your own community, you'll show that Canadians are legitimately worrying about price fixing. They're concerned about shrinkflation, words that I would say were not necessarily familiar for many, but now you're talking about that. I learned a new one, dequaliflation, recently, where people were questioning the quality of food products that we consume and how this has been reduced. People have been concerned about anti-competitive behaviors that you've seen, restrictive covenants in leases, in plaza around the commercial center across the country. And certainly, Canadians are frustrated, and they expect bold and decisive actions from each and every one of us. This is not just us as a government, but I would say it's us as Canadians where we need to tackle these things. And I think that we need to take, like I say, bold and decisive action. That's certainly what we intend to do. And I think this is something shared by colleagues on the Hill here in Ottawa. I would say that in a modern, open economy like ours, competition needs to guard against these kinds of wrongs and make sure that independent and small businesses have a fair shot at, gaining the business of Canadians in all sectors. I mentioned grocery, but let's be clear, this applies to all sectors of the Canadian industry. We know that competition is healthy, and we want more vibrant, I would say, marketplace in the country. And I think that's what we need to create in many sectors. And I think what we've done recently has kind of changed the tone in the country when it comes to that. I feel we've shaken the tree a bit, and I think it was much needed for that. I was talking to Matthew on my way. I was saying that's how I feel, actually, when I talk to CEOs around the country, that they understand that in the context of what we're living today, Canadians expect more from each and every one of us, and everyone to be part of the solution. Obviously, we all know that competition brings lower prices, more choice drive productivity, innovation, and growth. And it's only fair that companies should be fighting and competing for our business. It's very simple. And I think you've seen what's going on in the U.S. Certainly, I'm talking to our friends down south, what's going on in Europe. You've seen a movement, I think, where competition is becoming at the forefront. Because I think everyone realized that more competition brings lower prices. And certainly my goal has been in different sectors to bring a more competitive environment so that Canadians can benefit from that. And we need immediate and long-term actions. No one suggests that there's a silver bullet out there, but I think everything we're doing is going in one direction. And certainly with your help and your feedback, because many of you have been involved in our consultation, is going to be helpful in order to achieve that. De nombreux secteurs de l'économie canadienne peuvent faire partie de solutions. Et je pense qu'on leur demande de faire preuve de bonne volonté, mais aussi de créativité. Le mois dernier, vous avez vu, j'ai réuni les PDG des 5 grandes chaînes d'alimentation au Canada et certainement aussi les fabricants internationaux comme Nestlé et Unilever de venir ici à Ottawa. Et j'ai transmis un message qui était fort, un message qui venait de la part de 40 millions de Canadiens et Canadiennes qui leur disait « assez, c'est assez ». Et je pense que ce message-là a été bien entendu de la part des différents PDG qui étaient avec nous. Et je leur disais, chacun doit faire sa part. Dans une chaîne d'approvisionnement, évidemment, qui est complexe, si vous regardez ce qui se passe en France, si vous regardez ce qui se passe en Angleterre, mais ils ont tous convenu d'apporter un peu de répit aux Canadiens et certainement d'aider à stabiliser les prix d'un bout à l'autre du pays. Et on va continuer de travailler. Ce que vous allez voir aujourd'hui, c'est des engagements avec un plan d'action initial, mais certainement, on va continuer de travailler avec eux pour faire avancer les discussions, parce qu'évidemment, c'est complexe. But we're also talking to our friends in France. We're talking to our friends in the UK. Some of that is cross-border, but I think what I was, when I left the meeting, let's be honest, in a non-regulated industry, when you call the CEOs to come to Ottawa, I don't know if it's good news for them, but I think it was good news for Canadians. But certainly they've come and I think they've embarked with us and say, yes, we want to be part of this journey. Since I became Minister of Innovation, Science and Industry, I've been looking for solutions to bring relief to Canadians. You would all agree, I think, because I'm talking to a panel of experts, a large panel, I should say, in front of me, that we have good tools in our toolbox, but they need to be freshened up and sharpened up. I mean, when I look at competition law in Canada, it needs to be kind of bolstered, in my view, in many ways. If you look at many jurisdictions, and I talk to colleagues in different jurisdictions, there's more we can do, certainly, to bring our competition law and the competition framework to the 21st century. One of the key institutions that promote competition in this country is the Competition Bureau. And you will have seen that one of the things that I did, which I think was paramount, it's good to put perhaps new tools in the toolbox through regulation or laws, but you need to empower the Competition Bureau to do the enforcement, to do the work that it's needed. And I wanted the Bureau to be properly equipped to help make life more affordable for Canadians and ensure greater consumer protection. And that's what we did, because not only like I said, we need legislative fix, but we also need a body that has the team, the tools, and resources to really enforce what we have in the law. So let me talk about some of the steps that we have taken, although some of you would be very familiar with that. Dans le premier budget de 2021, vous avez vu, on a donné un gros coup de pouce au bureau avec un investissement d'environ 96 millions de dollars sur 5 ans et 27 millions par la suite pour permettre au bureau d'accomplir sa mission. Pour moi, c'était fondamental de dire la première chose qu'il faut faire, c'est de notre côté, qu'est-ce qu'on peut faire pour aider le bureau à remplir sa mission. Par la suite, en 2022, vous serez très familier, on a fait une première série de modifications pour moderniser la loi sur la concurrence afin de combler certaines lacunes, par exemple, des lacunes qui vont nous permettre de promouvoir un plus grand choix, un meilleur prix pour les consommateurs canadiens. And the set of things we did in 2022 were long. I would say there was large consensus in the community of experts in competition that they were long overdue. So that was kind of the down payment we did in 2022. Et évidemment, ça inclut une révision aux amendes pour les compagnies qui sont reconnues coupables de fixation de prix, comme on a vu dans le récent scandale du pain. Ces mesures n'étaient que les premières étapes pour améliorer le régime de concurrence du Canada et répondre aux préoccupations pressantes du marché. But let me say also a few words about consultations, because I know many of you, whether you're here in Ottawa or at home this morning, wherever you might be across the country, we always knew that these amendments were just a first step, a down payment on what we needed to do, and that our toolbox could be updated with new tools. And that's where you come into play. That's why we launched, I would say, a very extensive consultation on our competition policies. I've heard people say you could do more. Yeah, you could always do more, but the number of emails that I've received and the number of people who have engaged, I would say this was really broad-based, and I think no one can really suggest that our government has not done enough consultation. I remember we're probably in the history of Canada, the government was consulted the most with stakeholders on so many fields to make sure that we get the right pulse and the right feedback from all of you. And following the consultation, we released the What We Heard report, which is informative. And in my view, the result of this report speak for themselves, that despite what some have said, Canadians want decisive action. And I would put it to you, they want it now. So that's why I'm so happy that I have Sébastien and our colleagues from the Senate, because this is not about this government, but this is answering a call from Canadians who are saying, yeah, we want more, and we want it now. Canadians are concerned with higher costs. They're concerned about reduced choice and increased power of large corporations, particularly in industries where consumers feel an immediate impact on their pocketbook. And that's certainly a place where you have seen we've put a lot of attention and focus. On balance, it was evident that many stakeholders, academics who are with us this morning, consumer groups, I'm sure that many of you represent consumer groups, unions, civil society organizations, as well as many industry associations, felt that the law in its current form was no longer fit for purpose. And that's what we're addressing and will continue to address, so that I hope by the time I finish my term as Minister of Industry that we could say, to a large extent, mission accomplished. I mean, there's always more to do. It's a fast-evolving set of circumstances. The world, trust me, I've done that 9 years by now, 4 or 5 departments. The world is changing rapidly, and we've seen what 24 hours could do in politics. So trust me, a lot of things are moving, but at the same time, I think once we have done that, we will have cleared the books in a way for, I would think, for the next few years and potentially the next decade. En même temps que notre consultation a fait ressortir des préoccupations des milieux juridiques et du milieu des affaires. Puis je veux remercier tous ceux qui sont avec nous aujourd'hui. Votre contribution, évidemment, est importante. Vous avez tous et toutes contribué pendant des décennies à définir la loi de la concurrence au pays. Et vous nous avez vraiment indiqué 2 choses particulières. La nécessité d'apporter de la précision et de la prévisibilité dans nos lois. So predictability and clarity. Listen, I'm a lawyer. I understand that. I used to be on the other side. I understand that stability, predictability, and the rule of law is what brings investment. I always challenge people around the world, find me a jurisdiction without predictability, stability, and the rule of law. Obviously, those are the tenet of any investment. So we want to be very clear that that's what we're aiming for. And we also want to put a regime that your clients, in many ways, can obviously meet the and when people say, is Canada still an attractive jurisdiction? Well, listen, I am deeply convinced of that. You don't need to look very far. Last week, we attracted Nordvolt. I can mention Volkswagen, Ford, GM, Ericsson, Nokia. Listen, the list goes on of people who want to come to Canada. So when I hear people, are you concerned, Minister? I say, well, if you receive as many text messages from investors that I do, you would feel very confident when you go to bed in the evening that Canada is one of the primary jurisdictions in the world to attract investment in all fields, whether it's mining, whether it's the industry of the future, whether it's those who have selected even Canada for R&D, and those who are selecting Canada for the economy of the 21st century. So what we need to do, obviously, is to provide stability and predictability in what we're going to be doing, but I'm very confident that when you look around the world, Canada shines in many ways in terms of attracting investment. Donc, évidemment, je pense qu'on va être capable de tenir compte de vos préoccupations En travaillant à arriver au juste équilibre, hein, je pense que c'est ça comme législateur qu'on doit faire, c'est arriver à l'équilibre pour prendre en compte vos préoccupations, les préoccupations des gens, mais aussi de se donner un cadre moderne. When homes need structural repairs, we should not be so naive as to think that a fresh coat of paint will do the trick, nor so hasty as to tear it down entirely. That's why I'm very much advocating kind of the middle road in what we're looking, so that we are a balance. We're Canadians, after all. So we always take a balanced view of things. We're not going to one extreme or the other, but we want to make sure we have a balance. And in my view, as many of you would follow the agenda in the building just next to me, C56, in my view, strikes the right balance. Our work started when Parliament resumed this fall by introducing Bill C56 to make more significant change to the Act. And let me go to provide you some of the highlights, because some of you will be very familiar. For some watching maybe at home, they're less familiar. But the first thing we're going to be doing, we're going to give more power to the Competition Bureau to conduct and complete more effective investigations. And that new regime for me is much needed. The fact that we can compel the production of information or documents, to me, is clearly outdated. Canadians are entitled, and government is entitled to make sure that we have proper information in order to shape policy. And I think if you look at jurisdictions around the world, I've not done the analysis myself, but I would think we're one of the very few jurisdictions where you can compel information in order to have the right information to base public policy. To me, that's really common sense. The second we're going to make, and I know this is something that many of you have lived through for many decades, we will make it easier to block mergers that are not in the best interest of consumers. And that's why we will remove the so-called efficiencies defense. And I know many of you have lived under this regime. I think this was introduced in 1968 or thereabout. Was it? I look at Matthew, 68 or thereabout. 86. I thought it was even further back. I thought I was not born at the time when this was done. But certainly, I think it's time that we put consumer as the focal point when it comes to competition. And I think a mature economy like us, I mean, if you look around the world, we're probably the only one in the OCDE to have something anywhere close to that. So I think it's a great time to bring that into the modern age and making sure that the so-called efficiencies defense is no longer an absolute defense for anti-competitive mergers in Canada. And I heard from many, but trust me, I'm resolute in that, because I think we need, as a mature economy entering in the 21st century, to be able to bring more competition and therefore get rid of something that maybe was there at the time, but certainly today does not warrant, in my view, to be part of the competition framework we have in Canada. And thirdly, we'll also empower the Competition Bureau to take action against collaborations that stifle competition and reduce consumer charge. Those are, I'm talking now as a lawyer. Apologies for those at home and in the room, but those kind of restrictive covenants that we've seen in leases that reduce competition. And that applied largely also in the grocery sector, and I've heard a number of cases where this is concerning. So I think these three things, giving more power to the Competition Bureau, getting rid of the efficiencies defense, and certainly tackling anti-competitive collaboration, that's going to put, I think we're going to be in a framework where, we'll have a more competitive environment in Canada. And for me, that's the best way to stabilize prices and to bring more competition. This kind of, the framework we're putting, what we did before, what we're doing now, and what will come. I just want to be clear to all of you here today. Some have said, well, Minister, you went like on an incremental basis. Listen, I am a very practical person. I know that time when you hold office is short, so you need to have impact when you can. And therefore, we thought that these were the amendments that were much needed at the time, and that a larger package could be discussed, but we needed to act now to address the concerns of Canadians. Donc, évidemment, on a priorisé des réformes qui sont plus directement liées aux enjeux identifiés pour assurer plus de concurrence dans le secteur de l'alimentation. Comme je le disais, c'est une première réponse à la récente consultation publique. Et les modifications que nous proposons vont donner plus de marge de manœuvre au bureau pour garantir plus de concurrence, évidemment, dans ce secteur-là. Maintenant que le Parlement étudie nos réformes avec M. Lemire et les collègues du Comité de l'industrie, nous allons continuer d'évaluer les autres propositions qui ont été faites par les Canadiens pour réformer nos lois sur la concurrence et nous pourrions présenter d'autres réformes. So what I was saying is that clearly this is another step, a much-needed step that we needed to take, but clearly we're going to be continuing with what you heard report and engaging with you as to what more. Hopefully, when we have done all that, we can look at each other and say, we have done what was needed to revamp our competition policy, just like I did also with the Invest in Canada Act. As you see, this was kind of the same thing. You have to look at the tools in the toolbox and see how old they were and whether they fit for purpose. And I think on both fronts, we're doing better with that. So you can ask what's next, and maybe you're going to say, maybe I've exceeded even the time, Matthew, that you've given me this morning. But beyond the Bureau and the Act, the Government of Canada has other tools that we're using to fight more competition in our economy. Indeed, affordability and competition law have been central to the work. Also, for example, in the telecom sector, and I know some of you have followed me over the last few months when it came to some of the cases that have appeared in front of me, and I would say in front of the Competition Bureau. My resolve was always to work for greater competition to allow small regional players to grow and challenge the larger ones. And for example, roaming on the big three networks has been regulated in order to provide more access to Canadians. And I hope if there's folks from Toronto today, you saw that earlier this week, Torontonians finally got cell services on the Toronto subway system because our government took action. And this had today, as we speak, a positive impact on more than 2 million people who take the subway every day. And when I went to bed that day, I was thinking, you know, that's a great example of the power of smart policies. You know, you take action and 2 million people now have cell phone access in the subway in Toronto, which has been wanting for years, if not a decade. And I think this is really, when I look at each and every one of you, I'm saying, this is what we should challenge each other. What are smart policies that will help Canadians? What are the smart policies we can put in place that will bring more competition? What are the smart policies that Canadians will look at each and every one of us and say, they get it. They've been there for us and they're working for us. And that's really what my work and your work and all of our work should be all about. And for me, the Toronto Transit example is probably one of the best ones you can imagine, that by changing one thing, we have impacted the life of 2 million people in about 30 days. That's the power of policy. That's what you're here for. That's what today is all about. That's why you're going to be informing Matthew and all of us to make sure we adopt these smart policies so that millions of Canadians will look back and say, this was worthwhile. So this is a great start, but I would say, obviously, there's more work to do. No one would pretend that we're sitting here today and that we have fixed everything. We know that competition is the driving force behind innovation, and we know that more competition leads to lower prices. So be assured that we're going to be continuing to work together with you because we want to have real positive impact. I would say let's seize the moment. You hear, you read, you listen to people just as much as I do. They want action. Let's be ambitious. If you look at what others did before us, they were ambitious. They had tools in the toolbox that were fit for purpose at their time. The world is fast evolving in technology and innovation, and even the rule-based order. I mean, things are changing at a speed that very few of us could have anticipated even 10 years ago, 5 years ago. And finally, I would say, let's all strive for more competition in this country and lower prices for Canadians. With that, ladies and gentlemen, it's a real pleasure to be with you. Merci d'être là ce matin. I don't know what's the next chapter today, but I just want to say thank you. Merci d'être là aujourd'hui. Je vous souhaite une excellente journée. Merci tout le monde. No? Okay. I have to open the house to tell you, but opening the House this morning. Here we go. Sir.
Minister, thank you for your remarks, and thank you all for hosting this event.
Sorry, I hate to interrupt, but we have interpretation and accessibility issues, so there's a microphone at the back if anyone would like to ask questions. Sure.
Sorry, you see when I changed the program what happened? They said minister, but I could not resist. So here you go, sir.
Wonderful. Danny Asaf from
Yes.
Tories. Nice to see you, Minister.
Thank you
very
for being
much.
here.
It's a real pleasure. The question that I have, and I took great interest in your remarks, obviously, and how you're shaping policy and the impact on Canadians and modernizing. But the one thing that you really resonated was the practical and the middle road. And as we look ahead to what our objectives should be, one of the things is how do we avoid demonizing while we modernize, which is to have some fiction of some bad person or bad entities that will misguide us in terms of finding that practical middle path you described.
Well, that's a very good question, and I think you've seen in my words, or at least I tried to explain in my words, that there are things that we need to fix. But just look at the grocers, for example. You know, obviously, non-regulated industry being called in Ottawa, first time, I think, in Canadian history, I'm told by some academics. But at the end of the day, I expressed the frustration of millions of people, but I said at the same time, be part of the solution, embark on this journey together, because at the end of the day, don't look at me, don't look at the Prime Minister, but the 40 million people I speak on behalf of are your customers. You're not talking to me. You're talking to everyone today who's going to be watching TV and expecting you to do something. And therefore, that's the power of soft power somehow, is that governments, and not only in Canada, you look at the United States and other jurisdictions, that's what we can bring to the table and say, listen, let's do the right thing for people, but at the same time, you're quite right, it's not about demonizing, but in a world which is very polarized, sometimes, you know, people take that back and say, I am very much in solution mode. I'm very much to say, listen, let's work together. We understand that there are complex issues. No one expects miracles, but everyone expects us to take actions. And inaction is not an option when people are hurting. And therefore, I think that's kind of the spirit, the Canadian spirit, that needs to come out of that. And I'm always careful in my remarks. I appreciate in that. You could say sometime, like you, I am frustrated. When you meet people in the subway in Toronto, which did not have cell phone for like, what, a decade? It's difficult not to express frustration, because this is for everyone and every day. They feel the frustration. So on some time, I have to be very frank and open and hard, because that's how people feel. But at the same time, I'm always trying to say, once we have done that, let's work on solutions, because that's the Canadian way how we resolve issues. That's what I've been trying to do. And like you said, it's not going to demonizing, it's expressing sometimes heartfelt feelings of people, but at the same time, then moving on to say, okay, now that we have established that, now that you have heard it on behalf of 40 million people, what are you going to do to help us solve it? And if you're not doing it, then we'll have tools in the toolbox that make sure you do it, because that's what a democracy is all about at the end. You know, it's to express the will of the people. But I think I can report back that people, whether it's been in the telecom or the grocery recently, Canadians wanted to be part of the solution. And that's the true Canadian spirit.
Thank you, Minister, for your perspective and leadership. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Madam?
Thank you, Minister. My name is Robin Champagne, and I appreciate your comments about incrementalism and being able to take advantage of opportunities for positive change as they arise. Vas Bednar and I wrote an article earlier this week talking about that incrementalism. And the
I read it, by the way.
Ah, I'm glad.
And I know Vas, so I read it.
I got the sense you did. We argued that we also need deeper, broader reform, and something I'm curious to learn more about is what you envision that process to look like, and when can we expect that to happen? Sure,
and thank you for the article, by the way. I read most of what you write, perhaps not all of everything in the body of people in front, but I do because I'm very passionate, and I try to make impact. You know, the amendments we put were really, I mean, the first wave, let me say, it's like a third wave. The first wave was really common sense things that everyone has been waiting for a long time. We put that in the budget in 2022, and that was, you know, raising penalties, things that just are in the ordinary course of business. what we're doing with C56 is a set of measures which are very targeted, because I think they were much needed to really to bring the momentum. I think we have some momentum, not only in Canada, but if I look at other jurisdictions, there's a momentum for more competition. And to your point about, the broader set of things that we need to do, totally. One does not exclude the other. I think they're very complementary. I try to do things that Canadians would want to see as quickly as possible, and in a minority parliament, you really have to be judicious. Although I always thank my colleagues for being part of the journey with us, but you have to be judicious to say, how can I have impact as soon as possible to address that, whilst at the same time looking at a broader set of issues, and the rethink that you suggested with VAS is very much needed. But I think one does not preclude the other, because some are fixing things which will have immediate impact, and I think it's going to help us, my sense at least, is to bring Canadians along the journey to see, okay, it really matters to me when we do things like that, because they get it. They're doing things. I think about the restrictive covenants in leases that would prevent smaller grocers to go close to one of the big establishments. I think there's a broad sense of, I would say, a consensus around these things, and I didn't want to wait. There was two choices. Either I waited and I bring a full package, or I try to effect things that there's broad consensus as soon as possible, because it takes time before the change in the law would have impact on the market. So you're very conscious of the arc of time. But at the same time, I don't want anyone here to leave that we feel that's mission accomplished and now there's no more thing to do. Clearly, there's more to do, and the rethink that you suggest in your article is very much needed at the same time.
Great,
Merci.
thank you.
I think I can have one more, because now when I see my staff all standing up, that means that the new speaker may not be happy with me, because we need to have at least quorum for him to do his job. And I'm part of quorum this morning. So, but why don't you go to the microphone, sir, and I'll try to answer quickly to make sure that the speaker, I'm not his first pick today.
Thank you, Minister, for very constructive remarks. I'm Cal Goldman. I practiced law, former head of the Competition Bureau some years back when the efficiency...
Thanks for your service.
You're very welcome. When the efficiency defense was first introduced, and have lived with it since. Minister, you talked about doing things that are smarter to promote competition. We just saw the interest of Canadians coast to coast in the telecom sector in the Rogers Shaw proceedings. I wrote a piece together with Dr. Larry Schwartz, Richard Taylor, former Deputy Commissioner of the Bureau, about the importance of considering, finally, the removal, or at least the alleviating of foreign barriers to competition in the telecom sector. Because for whatever reason, historically, Canada still restricts foreign entry into the telecom sector that denies Canadian businesses and Canadian consumers true competition in the telecom market. You've talked about doing things smarter. I suggest, Minister, it's time to consider lowering those foreign entry barriers to allow for a far more effective competition in the telecom services market, which is vital to Canadians.
Well, I appreciate it. I did not read that article, I must say, but I'll look at, but I'll look at it, and I'd be appreciative.
I don't take it personally.
No, you should not. No, you should send it to me, and I'll be looking at that. And certainly, as part of going back to the first question that was asked, having a rethink, and certainly submission by all of you is something that we consider. I'm always striving for more competition. I think you've seen that also in the telecom sector. The goal that I had was more competition, lower prices across the nation, and I think we have been, the impact of that is going to be felt for decades, but I hear you on that, and certainly I'm happy to read your article and certainly make your voice heard as part of the consultation as we reflect on a number of things. With that, sir, I'm happy to give you my number, not you, but the other gentleman. If you have a question, we can walk together, because now I'll really make myself noticed by the speaker by being late. So merci tout le monde. Je vous souhaite une excellente journée. Thank you, everyone. Merci.